I've been at this for so long I don't even know what this video is about anymore. I know it's about Saint Rita, the patron saint of the impossible. She should edit this.
I'll reside beside this creek for days to come. Let my belly be starved and feet wearisome.
I'm taking a break today from the floor problem to install a shrine to my patron saint, Saint Rita of Cascia. It's probably nuts to put a big antique shadow box, with reverse painted glass right over the wheel of a bus. But she's the patron saint of the impossible, so I figured I might as well try something hard. I've always been drawn to the stories of the saints. I guess it's my dark, dramatic side that feels the pull because the stories are very dark. Rita's is not an exception, but she has a lot in common with so many of the women I've met out on the road that sometimes I think that she's the patron saint of nomads, especially female nomads. Most people think of St. Christopher for that, and that makes sense because he's the patron saint of travelers. Well, he was. He's not actually a saint anymore, which I think that's kind of silly. I mean, the church has like 10,000 saints. They're going to kick out the one guy that everybody has on the dashboard. Anyway, Rita was born Margherita Lotti in 1381. As a girl, she was attracted to religious life, and it's not really clear whether she was attracted to it, just for the virtue of the whole thing, or if it had something to do with the fact that nuns were the only women who were allowed to be educated at that time. That's why eventually when you see a few female intellectuals making themselves known, they're nuns. Whatever her reason was, Rita wanted to be a nun. And if she'd had her way, she would have entered the convent probably in her mid-teens, like maybe about age 15. But her parents had other ideas, and they made arrangements for her to marry a guy named Paolo Mancini. The marriage lasted 18 years, but it wasn't a match made in heaven. His family had been involved in this blood feud for many, many years with another family, the Chiqui family. And Paolo was an angry rich guy, basically, with a lot of enemies. Rita regularly endured abuse. They had 2 sons together. Throughout her marriage, Rita never stopped praying for Paolo. She never stopped patiently trying to win him over, to get him to renounce violence, both against her, against the Chiquis. Eventually she succeeded. She convinced him to let go of the blood feud, and it seems like he even became sort of a loving partner to her at the end of his life. Of course, that end came fairly quickly. Just because Paolo gave up violence doesn't mean the other guys did, and he was eventually murdered by a member of the Chiqui family. At Paolo's funeral, Rita publicly forgave his murderer. That just was something that wasn't done. It had never happened. The way things typically went, the sons would avenge the death of the father. And Paolo's brother Bernardo was very invested in this happening. He did everything he could to make that happen. Rita begged her sons not to retaliate, but Bernardo was talking in their other ear and telling them, what they had to do if they wanted to be manly, what the right thing to do was, and they were listening. So Rita prayed. She prayed and prayed for God to please keep her children out of that cycle, out of the vendetta, keep them from committing the violence that would have hardened them the way her husband, their father, had been hardened. And her prayer was answered. They were kept out of it, but that's because both of her sons got sick and died of dysentery before they could exact any revenge.
In closets and drawers of kisses that I have saved, who shall I give them to? They're gifts that are stowed away.
Now Rita's alone. She has the heartbreak of the loss of her sons weighing heavily on her. She has the loss of her husband weighing on her. But now she can do the thing she always wanted to do. She can be a nun. Except the nuns won't let her in, because there are members of the Chiqui family already in the order that she wants to join, and if she joins, it's going to cause a lot of tension. So Rita begins a campaign to reconcile the Chiqui and Mancini families. She starts first with her husband's family, and she convinces them to let go of the blood feud. And then the Chiquis, when they see what she's done, they see that it's worked, they decide to renounce violence as well. They let her be a nun after that. A lot of women I've met out on the road are embarking on what for them is a spiritual journey. After they've raised a family, been through a marriage, suffered losses, and come out the other side, a lot of them have made seemingly impossible things happen. They've built a rig. They've found friendship and support in the desert. They've seen the country. They've survived on really basically nothing. Rita ends up with a life of her own choosing, her own making, and that, to me, looks a lot like the people I've met out on the road. But as I was making this video, drawing that parallel, I just kept bumping up against something, and I feel like this is where the stories diverge. She gets her heart's desire. She gets the life of the spirit she's been longing for after all that darkness and all that loss, but once she's a nun, there's a whole other kind of darkness. Rita and her friends have some funny ideas about sacrifice and deprivation. And I know there are people out there who think that anyone who wants to go live in a bus or a van or a car does too, but that's not what I'm talking about. Back then, to devote yourself to God was to commit to a life of suffering. Not just the regular suffering that life inevitably dishes out. I'm talking about extraordinary suffering. Google mortification of the flesh if you want to know. I'm not going to get into it, but anyway, that covered sacrifice. But they also wanted deprivation. And for men, celibacy took care of that. For women, they had to stop eating. There was even a name for it, anorexia mirabilis. Holy anorexia, miraculous loss of appetite. This is my third time shooting this video because things keep coming up that change how I see it. And I realize that I want to say something different because with these kinds of videos, as opposed to like the fixing a floor videos, which I'm procrastinating as we speak, but with these kind of videos, I usually figure stuff out while I'm making it. They're not usually this complicated for me though. Before I started, I had no idea how much I related to the darkness in Rita's world. The world of all the female saints, really. Rita wasn't even one of the most extreme. They say she lived on Eucharist alone for long stretches, but she lived. Not all of them did. I have some funny ideas about sacrifice and deprivation myself, and a decade or so ago they landed me in what I call the food hospital, where I basically learned how to eat again. Not everyone there lived either. I was definitely in a world where that kind of sickness is held up as a virtue, and I feel like I'm still in that world because as a society, we worship at the shrine of skinny. It's easy to make it all about vanity, but discipline is one of the oldest spiritual values, and it's kind of romantic and easy to let your darkness become your identity when you're connecting it to discipline. One of the things I love about stories is how they change. It's like a painting, those paintings with the eyes that follow you around the room. A good story can really just meet you where you are sometimes and give you something different than you thought was there. Rita is often pictured kneeling before a crucifix and staring at it, and usually there's a laser beam coming out of it, illuminating a thorn that's stuck in her head. And the story says that Rita was meditating in front of a crucifix one day and asked God, or told God, she wanted to experience Christ's pain. So boom, a thorn comes flying into her forehead, and for the rest of Rita's life she had partial stigmata, an impression of the crown of thorns on her forehead. In that old life, that food hospital life, I related to Rita's story because it was extreme, because Rita was extreme. And maybe my reasons for things were different, but I cherished that thorn in my head. Before, it was a picture of a woman who was willing to put herself through extraordinary suffering for the chance to see God. Now, I see it as the story of a woman of extraordinary compassion, who's willing to share the pain of another person for a chance to see that person clearly. It's how she led her husband to find his heart.
It's how she brought peace to people who had really only ever known war.
Compassion.
And that's what I relate to now.
I don't know why it took me so long to figure out that compassion, it's so much more than discipline.
But selfish I may be, but then we're all the same. We each have a body of water where we can breathe.
I don't know if it's going to work. I'm going to say yeah, because impossible is her thing. Even the Pope said so. But if the glass breaks, if the statue disintegrates, it's only a symbol. Reed is only a symbol. She looks pretty cool right there, though.